Arsenio.
Regularly scheduled CBS programming will not be seen tonight, so that we may bring you the following special program. This program is brought to you in part by Volkswagen, by Shell, experience the difference, and by Walmart. Always the low price on the brands you trust. Always.
Good evening. Here are the headlines for March 1949. Mayor William B. Hartsfield, facing an election this year, has already indicated he will run. Rich's department store has announced plans to build a 1,000-car parking garage over the railroad tracks on Forsyth Street. Public Service Commission Chairman Walter McDonald has advised telephone users not to pay a recently imposed telephone rate hike. The Georgia Real Estate Commission is organizing a crackdown trying to revoke the licenses of any dealers who sell property in white neighborhoods to Negroes. So far, 4 have been cited. Governor Herman Talmadge is reportedly in favor of the crackdown. State Revenue Commissioner Charles Redwine is investigating reports of a liquor swindle in Georgia that may have cost the state $500,000 in unpaid taxes. And finally, in the news, at 1032 West Peachtree Street, a new television station has signed on the air. Licensed to the Fort Industry Company, WAGA Television is operating on Channel 5. In addition to its own programs, the station will have presentations from the Dumont and CBS networks. Presently housed in temporary quarters, WAGA employs a staff of 50. General Manager George Storer Jr. has announced a 7-day-a-week schedule with programs airing every night from 7 until 9 o'clock.
We're impressed with the importance of this medium. We'll be different. We got a comedy act.
Senator John Kennedy chose Warm Springs for his Georgia visit.
It's one small step for man.
Belongs to the new Atlanta.
Presents another in our series of locally produced primetime specials. Tonight, the Eyewitness News anchors are your hosts for a unique look at some of the people who have helped make television in Atlanta what it was, and is, and will be.
If you were watching that Tuesday night in 1949, it might have been on a set like this Crosley. Remember the Crosley? WAGA has been on the air for nearly 15,000 days. 1/3 of a million hours have passed since the station first signed on. In all that time, film has been lost, tape worn out, and pictures have faded. But the memories are as bright, sharp, and as vivid as the day they were made. This is a show about memories. It tells the stories of a world, a country, and a state. But mostly, it's a story about Atlanta, and more than that, the story of a lot of people who've told that story to you, and what we see when we look at ourselves.
Well, we opened on West Peachtree in a house.
I was just standing there innocently when this truck came along, television, and knocked me over.
But I spent the better part of my 34 years in television at this station, celebrating its 40th anniversary.
I mean, I'd known all along. I mean, every cameraman knows he's smarter than all the reporters.
This is what I remember very vividly. We literally chased fire trucks, so to speak.
I think we helped open the station and television in this market to minorities and women.
We never had any demonstrations in the evening because they couldn't make the evening news.
We've come a long way, baby.
Television community has been a good part of our citizenry.
We have had a number of very, very successful alumni.
It was just a terrific place to be. It had an all, for a young newsman just starting out, really out of college, that was a terrific town to be in.
I guess I showed such promise. That had to be it.
I think anybody you talk to, whether in broadcasting or any other activity, really looks back to Atlanta if they've lived there and say, hey, why did I ever leave? I mean, that's the best, as good as it gets.
I remember when we won the November sweeps without a news director, which just lends credence to the fact that the inmates can sometimes run the asylum just fine.
But those were fun shows to do.
Well, I love being on television. It was my life. It was my career. And I enjoyed it, every minute of it.
But it was a little bit more comfortable a few years back. Again, though, I think we're talking from age. Maybe things look a little bit more golden looking back down the line.
The biggest material change is that people get paid much more money now for a job that most of us started to do because we felt it was a privilege and a pleasure.
I love the news media. They were just great. I see these fellas today arguing, always damning the news media and everything else. Well, I had a different ride, and I'm proud of it.
You could go on all day. Always like a mother and a child. Always like a handshake and a smile. Some things never change. Some things always.
Just as a smile will always brighten your day, your neighbors at Walmart will always welcome you with a warm greeting. Walmart, always the low price on the brands you trust, always.
If you're thinking about buying a new car, visit your Atlanta area Volkswagen dealer now, while he has factory-to-dealer cash incentives that make savings of up to $2,000 off MSRP possible on select models. And 4.9% APR financing on all new Golf, Jetta, GTI, and Cabriolet models. So think Volkswagen, but think fast, because these offers are good only until March 31st, and only at your Atlanta area Volkswagen dealer.
Different people have different reasons for making Shell gasolines the best-selling in America. Some like the performance of SU 2000.
Put in the best.
Some like paying the same price, cash or credit.
Okay, team, let's go.
Some like the little extras you don't find everywhere.
Your front tire's a bit low.
The people may be different. The reasons may be different. But the choice is the same. Shell. Experience the difference.
Imagine a game with over 70 million prizes. Enough for 1 out of 3 people to win. Introducing Scrabble at McDonald's. Just collect the right game pieces and spell the winning words, or win instantly a delicious Big Mac, a refreshing Sprite, or $1 million. And that could change your whole life. Play Scrabble at McDonald's. In a word, you can win.
1950, 865,000 people live in Atlanta. A war has started in Korea. And like WAGA, Camp Chevrolet, Shepherd Construction, and Zestos are all in their first full year of operation. The coast-to-coast coaxial cable means Atlantans can now see television shows live instead of kinescopes, film shot off the face of a television tube. 1951, Lucille Ball debuts.
Fred.
And on a program called See It Now, with his monitor showing the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, Edward R. Murrow offered a cautionary welcome to the latest technology.
For the first time, man has been able to sit at home and look at 2 oceans at the same time. We're impressed with the importance of this medium. We shall hope to learn to use it and not to abuse it.
WAGA left its temporary home in a house and moved into a new building at 1018 West Peachtree in November of 1951. And WAGA the dog, the Scotty who was the station's mascot for years, was representing a radio and television station whose custom-designed equipment was the state-of-the-art.
We had fun with that dog for years. That dog was the talk of WAGA. In fact, we named the dog WAGA.
Our call letters, by the way, were not just the pooch's name. They stand for Atlanta, Georgia. The broadcast day in 1952 was a lot shorter than it is now when we are on the air 24 hours a day.
unbelievable, exciting time. And everything, of course, was talked about by people the next day, what was on TV and so forth.
The emphasis, of course, was whatever was on the tube, programming, entertainment primarily, and the newscasting business was just edged into it.
But a lot of the schedule was filled with programs that originated in Channel 5 studios. Shows like From a Lady, His Kitchen. Ed Blair was delivering the news on WAGA. At the same time, a young reporter named Ray Moore went to work a few blocks north.
So I was in television beginning in 1952 and through 1974 at both 2 and 5.
I, Dwight D. Eisenhower, do solemnly swear.
In addition to a new president, America got a new publication in 1953. TV Guide got its start. The biggest news of 1954 was the Supreme Court's ruling in Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka that segregation is illegal, that there is no such thing as separate but equal. Another barrier fell that year. Dr. Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile. Our transmitter and tower were moved to Briarcliff Road. Paralee Brock began 2 decades of producing the 4-H hour. Marvin Griffin was governor, and over in Montgomery, Alabama, a woman named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus to a white man. Martin Luther King Jr. began his work on nonviolent social change. In 1957, he founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference.
I think the early stories of the civil rights movement were clearly the most important aspect of my life, but I think also the most important part of America. We could not have had a civil rights movement as we had it without television.
People got more aware of technology in the late 50s. Videotape came to television, stereophonic sound came home, and Sputnik came as a shock to everybody, except the Russians. The last year of the decade saw WAGA become a television operation only. The radio station was sold to Plow. And another court ruling, this one in Atlanta, set the stage for the city to show it was indeed too busy to hate.
The decision came down from the judge to that Atlanta had to desegregate its schools.
Now, one of the issues in it was the problems that were coming up at that time. We went into it thinking about open public schools. That was a big issue at that day. The race issue per se, as the whole issue, had not reached a point that it did later on.
Don't be cruel to whose heart is true. Always, just like sunlight through the clouds, always working hard and feeling proud. Some things never change, some things are always.
You can always tell who has the green thumb in the neighborhood. And Walmart will always have the low price on this 3.5-horse Murray lawnmower, only $96.94. Walmart, always the low price on the brands you trust, always.
What makes Pearl different? From a thorough eye exam to the latest in lenses and brand name frames, nobody takes more care to make sure your glasses are right. Maybe that's why more people trust their eyes to Pearl than anyone else.
Before you consider buying this car, or this car, consider this, the Volkswagen Fox GL, which comes in under all three. So if you found small Japanese four-door sedan prices to be hovering above reality, the only thing left to consider is a test drive in a Fox. But do it soon, because Foxes go fast.
Before you buy a car, test drive a Fox at your Atlanta area Volkswagen dealer.
Brace yourself for another busy week in the South. Need more time? You've got it. Because now you can bank 7 days a week till 8 p.m. at Bank South's full-service offices in Kroger stores all over Atlanta.
If there is one word that fairly describes the 60s, it would surely be colorful, which was not what a lot of television was. This compact Admiral, like most sets, was equipped only to bring you black and white. At 11 years old, it still worked fine. But this would turn out to be as unnerving a 10 years as this country's ever spent, and a lot of attention would be focused on Atlanta, whose skyline gave hardly a hint of what it would become either. About the tallest feature was the 5-year-old Fulton National Bank building. A distinguished guest, just back from a world tour, appeared with Dale Clark and his panel on Reporter's Notebook, one of several news and public affairs programs. The announcer for the program was probably Dave Michaels.
Somebody told me years before I even joined this place, go down there and learn everything, everybody's job. So when they're sick, you can walk in and do it. And I did that.
This was the year WAGA became the first television station in Atlanta to present daily editorials. And television turned out to be an important factor for the first time in a presidential election. In the debates between John Kennedy and Richard Nixon, the cameras seemed to like Kennedy better. As far as the big stories in Atlanta, here's a sample from a rare year-end review of the news, hosted by Ed Blair.
The face of crime and violence was evident throughout Georgia in 1960, leaving its indelible imprint on the state.
44-year-old Lieutenant Herman Copeland was shot in the mouth as he worked his way to the basement area where Asbury was holed up. Officers finally closed in on the suspect, who had also taken a bullet wound in the foot.
At least one political campaign got off to a start from jail.
It means that I bow to the majesty and the dignity of the law. And I am compelled to campaign from the jail.
2 Negro students were seeking admission to the University of Georgia, and challenging procedures and policies they contend are discriminatory. The hearing in this courtroom may well have laid the foundation for another major desegregation chapter early in 1961.
Still another candidate entered the race for a congressional seat, this one an independent. Willie B., the Grant Park Zoo gorilla, the one on the left, declared he would wrest away the chair occupied by 5th District Representative James C. Davis.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
It was very cold at President Kennedy's inauguration. Atlantans could check conditions on the weather sign on our tower behind the studios, then at 1018 West Peachtree. A good friend, the late Ed Thelenius, came to WAGA to form a sports department. The new airport opened and was immediately the 5th busiest. But the biggest story in Atlanta in 1961, the desegregation of the Atlanta public schools.
What I recall about that day is that everybody was anxious, praying for the best, fearing the possibility of the worst, believing Atlanta was not going to be like many other places in the South, that we would be better than that. And lo and behold, we were.
And there were a lot of forecasts there was going to be problems, and there weren't any. There wasn't a single incident that day. And that was the day that Atlanta really turned the corner in my mind, and I think the minds of many Georgians.
It was done so quietly that it was heard around the world, was what Helen Bullard said about it, which was a good statement.
Ivan Allen Jr. was installed as William B. Hartsfield's successor. Walter Cronkite replaced former Atlanta Douglas Edwards on the CBS Evening News. Jimmy Carter came to the Capitol as the state senator from Plains. John Glenn made 3 Earth orbits in Freedom 7. And several new faces showed up on Channel 5. Guy Sharpe, Paul Shields, and yours truly.
It's expected that the bill will be sharply debated in the House, but Capitol observers say there is a good chance of passage.
121 Americans lost their lives on this slope last Sunday.
On June 3rd, a plane crash at Orly Airport, Paris, killed more than 100 Atlantans. Mayor Allen went to the scene.
That group of people set out to develop a stronger cultural front in Atlanta, and of course the Atlanta Cultural Front came out of it in the Atlanta Art Alliance, which was the development of that great facility there on Peachtree Street.
The U.S. Surgeon General issued a report which concluded that smoking can be hazardous to your health.
Yes.
In his last program, Alan C. Anthony hosted a Channel 5 special on aviation, which traced the history of flight from Kitty Hawk to the astronaut.
Indeed, the fabulous age.
On November 22nd, John Kennedy was killed. '64 was a landmark year in the fight for racial justice. President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. won the Nobel Prize for Peace. The Beatles arrived in America. Eleanor Knight arrived here at WAGA, and Paul Raymond was appointed station manager. 1965 was the last year the Atlanta Crackers played. It was the year Phil Flynn began reporting from the state capitol.
Beginning Monday, the Georgia General Assembly will begin its last 2 weeks of work.
That was exciting, sure. I mean, looking back on it, it was exciting. Yeah.
What was probably
Actually, the legislature was boring as hell, if I know the truth. Georgia Camera was the best job I ever had. You know why? Because it beat working for a living. You'd go out and you'd meet the nicest people.
On February 19th, the groundbreaking ceremony was held for a new WAGA at 1551 Briarcliff Road. The stadium was finished. The Panorama News team featured Dale Clark with editorials, Ed Thelenius with sports, Paul Shields with weather, and the anchors, Alan Smith and me. Over at WSB, we had a new competitor.
At WAGA at the time, they were our principal competitors. It was a lively and competitive time in Atlanta, and I like the idea that the stations in that community were very much a part of the community. The people who ran the stations felt that they had a community obligation, and I thought that they exercised it in a responsible fashion. It was a lot of fun being there.
June 21st, 1966, the dedication of the new studios and offices of Channel 5. These pictures should settle once and for all the question of whose house this was. It never was a house. It has always been a television station. After a musical program ranging from the national anthem to Dixie, words of welcome were spoken by Mayor Ivan Allen and outgoing Governor Carl Sanders, among others.
WAGA TV, Channel 5, will commence carrying the nightly newscast from CBS News featuring this great newsman, Mr. Cronkite.
Buddy, you couldn't welcome me with a more welcome announcement than that.
The news was welcome to Walter, because until then, Channel 5 had been playing Amos and Andy in the time period.
There's been a mistake made here.
With host Eleanor Knight and Don Barber, viewers were taken on a tour of the place, and before long, a string of shows were being produced here. The Don Barber Show, Matches and Mates, High Q, and Mr. Picks.
IQ, I loved IQ. That was the World Book Encyclopedia high school version of College Bowl. It was the exact same rules, toss-up and bonus questions. We shot it with 5 cameras. It was as well produced as the network College Bowl. I started doing the Mr. Pick show because I was making $125 a week, and they were auditioning somebody for a children's show on Saturday morning. I said, how much are they going to pay for that? They said, $100. I said, great.
Television in a couple of years, and we're back.
Oh, it's so good to be back.
1967 saw the inauguration of Governor Lester Maddox.
By the law, yes, sir.
Leroy Powell left Channel 11 to join us. The Civic Center was finished, and there were riots in 127 cities, the worst in Newark and Detroit. There was happier news. 6 Flags Over Georgia opened, and the log flume was the big excitement. And Zernona Clayton joined us as host of a show called Themes and Variations.
And what Channel 5's step did opened the doors for so many other stations to do, follow their lead. I happened to have been the vehicle, but it had to be Channel 5's commitment to now, let's do it.
It was a cataclysmic year, there's no question about it.
It was that. In Vietnam, the Tet Offensive and the My Lai Massacre. In Chicago, brutal encounters between protesters and police. And in Memphis, Martin Luther King is killed. The Atlanta Memorial Arts Center opened in the fall with a spectacular production of King Arthur and Robert Shaw on the podium of the Atlanta Symphony. Lockheed flew the C-5A for the first time. The St. Louis Hawks followed the Braves to town. And Bob Brennan left CBS to join us and be the boss in the news department.
The reason I was hired from CBS was to build a news organization and become competitive.
Protect and defend.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
The year began well for us when Ray Moore left Channel 2 and joined us on Panorama News.
And I felt that there was a promise and a good solidity, and as a consequence, I felt it was a very respectable operation.
We put together a deal, and Ray Moore came to work for us. And almost a year to the day after he quit, he came into my office and he said, "I've got a story that I think we ought to lead with." I said, "What's that?" He said, "Hal Suit's going to run for governor on a Republican ticket." I said, "You sure?" He says, "Yeah, it's good stuff." He said, "Let me hold it. I don't want to lead with it until I talk to Hal." So he kept trying to get Hal and finally got him. And told him, "I'm going to use the story tonight, Hal."
So I went on the air at 6 o'clock and reported that Hal was going to run for governor. And immediately during the first break in Hal's 6 o'clock news on Channel 2, he was the anchor at that time, Aubrey Morris rushed into the into the studio with his microphone. "Tell me, Hal, is it true that you are going to run for governor?" So anyhow, I think at the end of that show, Hal resigned as news director and went on his gubernatorial trek.
And Bo Wright does the rest.
Now he's the Alabama football coach, but then Bill Curry was our new sportscaster. And Emmanuel Hall, now in the mortgage business, joined us to become the first black anchor in Atlanta. And just as the year was ending, a young man joined us.
From Fort McPherson, Georgia, this is Chuck Scarborough, TV5 News.
FBI agents hit a notorious Chinese drug ring in Queens, capturing weapons and a huge stash of heroin. Probably a lot of the reason that I've been as successful here as I have been, or have lasted as long, was because of the early training I had at WAGA. Those were exciting days. I don't do daily, day of air news gathering. And every so often I do get kind of an itch to do that again, because in Atlanta, when I first arrived as this fresh out of college general assignment reporter, I think my record in one day was 5 stories in a single day, all of which aired that day. A couple of fond memories I have was when I was assigned to do profiles on 18 aldermen in the city. That was how they broke me in. I attended, I don't know how many aldermanic meetings, but I lost all interest in covering local politics for a while there, let me tell you, after 18 profiles of 18 new aldermen.
If you're thinking about buying a new car, visit your Atlanta area Volkswagen dealer now, while he has factory-to-dealer cash incentives that make savings of up to $2,000 off MSRP possible on select models. And 4.9% APR financing on all new Golf, Jetta, GTI, and Cabriolet models. So think Volkswagen, but think fast, because these offers are good only until March 31st, and only at your Atlanta area Volkswagen dealer.
Sweet Georgia Brown.
One of the most famous names in chocolate
Sweet Georgia Brown.
is bringing its business to Georgia,
Sweet Georgia Brown.
which will bring more jobs. And Georgia Power was part of the team that convinced them to make Georgia home sweet home.
Sweet Georgia Brown.
Georgia Power. We also generate business.
Who's that?
Our neighbor, Orrin. Ever since he got his new Murray, he's been mowing the whole neighborhood.
When you pay good money for a mower, you want to be tough and dependable.
Does such a good job, we're making the yard bigger. What? Does such a
Murray
good...
mowers are as tough as they come, cutting after cutting after cutting.
That Murray's a good buy.
What?
Goodbye.
Oh, say hello to Edna.
Murray mowers, tough as they come.
Always like a mother and a child.
Always like a handshake and a smile. Some things never change.
Some
Just as Scouts pledge to always help others, Walmart pledges to always keep a generous supply of the brands you trust in stock. Walmart, always the low price on the brands you trust. Always.
WAGA and this spiffy little Motorola were both 21 years old in 1970. So, in fact, was I, just finishing up at Georgia State University. Although I didn't know it at the time, I would also be at Channel 5 before the decade was out. It began with a new mayor at City Hall. A new reporter joined the newsroom in January.
When Judy Woodruff came to work at Channel 5, she had very little to show for her career to that point.
It was an amazing experience. This was my first break in television.
And her first assignment was as a Capitol reporter, which gave Phil Flynn apoplexy and may have caused serious setback in his physical conditioning for several years. But she did a very good job.
Leroy Powell, believe it or not, was then working as a cameraman. Taught me everything there was to know about covering the state legislature.
Well, I taught her that riding up the elevators was a lot easier than walking up the stairs, for instance.
It's hard for me to capsulize my 6 years at the White House, but that was clearly a learning experience. It was baptism by fire coming to Washington from Atlanta and suddenly the next day having to cover the White House. We really need more than ever a context and a background and a depth of reporting that I think McNeil-Lehrer provides. I don't think we're the only people who provide it, but I think we have gone a long way towards showing that it's possible to do that, to be serious and to be thoughtful about news presentation without turning people off. I pinch myself still. I can't believe I'm doing what I'm doing. So many good things have happened to me professionally and personally. I can hardly believe it. I feel that number one, I feel I've got the best job in television journalism. I think McNeil-Lehrer is doing great things. I think Frontline is the foremost documentary. We're the only documentary series being aired nationally right now. And I'm living in a city where I can be with my family, with my husband and my 2 sons, and whom I get to see most nights. And I think that's, what more can anybody want? To do what you want to do professionally and to have a family you're close to. I have to pinch myself.
In March, David Gay was hired. Today, David is the executive news producer for a network-owned station in Chicago. Julius Alexander is in public relations at Lockheed, but he used to work here as well.
I was hired as a reporter/photographer, and they hired us that way so they could send us out along with a large camera rig to shoot news and to do the interviews. And then we came back to the station and we edited the film. I used to appear in minority ads for Channel 5. But yeah, so we're talking about 1970, and it was a different market, a different day. I still dream occasionally about working for Channel 5 and being out on an assignment.
The carving on Stone Mountain was finished in 1970, and Jerry Quarry fought a comeback fight with Muhammad Ali right in Atlanta. In a local referendum, voters in Fulton County and DeKalb County elected to add a penny to their sales tax to help finance a brand new MARTA system.
I'm most pleased, I guess, with the mass transit legislation that we were able to pass. It authorized the sales tax subsidization of the fare box, which made it possible for us to pass a referendum.
It never became a significant story, was the MARTA referendum.
Having spent several years in Miami running Storer Cable, Paul Raymond returned to WAGA as vice president and general manager.
The television business was not going to remain the same as it had been for the first 10, 15, 20 years of its life. That television stations were going to be a lot more dependent, and their survival was going to be tied a lot more directly to the service they provided individually to the market, primarily news and local programs.
A little-known state representative named Sam Nunn was elected to fill the seat that had been held for decades by Senator Richard Russell. Additions to the news staff included Chuck Moore, who's now anchoring at WXIA, sportscaster Tom Boyd, and Ken Roberts.
I thought I knew a lot when I got here,
but I really learned a lot. And I guess that's my fondest memory. I thank Channel 5 for really growing up in the area of journalism. What I'm doing right now is I'm driving a taxi, a checker cab. I've been driving a cab for better than 6 years now. Driving a taxi, taking care of my family, and preaching the word whenever possible. I'm an evangelist, incidentally. Well, I'm the proud papa of 5 sons and a little girl. I only have one little girl. She's 3 years old. They asked me, do you miss being on television? Well, with injecting a bit of levity right away, I say I miss the money, which I do. But yeah, I do. I miss it. You just can't set aside all of that time and experience in your life and just say, well, that's it, and shut the door on it. Yes, I miss Channel 5. But I used to say, that's going to do it for us from here for now. Have a good night tonight, a good day tomorrow. For the News Scene team, I'm Ken Roberts. Good night, all.
Let me just add one other thing here, and this gets back into something that we started here in 1972, and I am just thrilled to death that Sharon Summers and Ken Cook and the station are continuing, and that's the Muscular Dystrophy Telethon. That's one of the classic examples of how this station has been not only community-oriented, but oriented on a national scene to do something, to put something back into the pot. And boy, have they done it. And they're to be congratulated for that and so many other efforts that they have made to bless this town called Atlanta.
Richard Nixon began the term he would not finish, with Watergate occupying much of his and America's attention. That January, an ice storm, the worst in 40 years, was chronicled in a documentary by Peter Bannon, who eventually left us for New York City, then came back. He's now at Channel 2. Andy Hiller joined us as a reporter. He's now a big-shot political reporter at WBZ in Boston. And Virginia Gunn came to work here.
And then I became the full-time weekend receptionist. And then I became the regular 9 to 5 Monday through Friday receptionist. And Jim Ferguson, who was the program director at the time, asked me if I would be interested in becoming a booth announcer. I said, yeah, I'd love to.
In the city government of Atlanta,
Nor for any other office.
Atlanta's first black mayor took office that year. Under news director Pat Palillo, WAGA began an hour newscast at 6 o'clock. We telecast the first annual ecumenical service from Ebenezer Baptist Church to honor Dr. King's birthday. In February, Reg Murphy was kidnapped. We broke the story. We stayed with it for 50 hours. We were there when Murphy came home. Jackie Maddox, now a media specialist at Clark College, began her 14 years with us here at Channel 5. We sponsored the first Circus Day, and in the years since have given over 75,000 youngsters an afternoon at the greatest show on earth. Our veteran assignment editor, Jim Heath, Big Daddy to all of us, began his television career coming over from newspapers.
In 1972, Atlanta recorded 260 homicides, and 165 of the victims were shot with a pistol, a handgun.
Emmanuel Hall and George Gentry collaborated to produce an outstanding and honored documentary called Trouble in the Ghetto. It was a study of Atlanta's, even then, very serious crime problem.
But for too many of us, that heart-pumping sound is all too familiar. For some of us know it is coming our way again.
Marty Cinder, now a reporter for WNEV-TV in Boston, joined what we then called News Scene. One of the biggest sports stories in history happened right there in Atlanta Stadium when Hank Aaron slammed number 715, beating Babe Ruth's long-standing home run record. Governor George Busby was inaugurated. Former Governor Jimmy Carter hit the campaign trail in earnest. And I came to Channel 5 in February to be joined shortly by Sharon Summers and our troubleshooter Paul Reynolds and John Patrick. Marta broke ground for the rail line as well. The bicentennial year gave us 2 new reporters. Sachi Koto is now with CNN by way of a stint on Japanese television.
So when I went over there, I had to really fight to get on the air and do hard stories. Instead of just sit there and smile and bow to your co-anchor. That was strange, but they do. They bow at the beginning of the cast, they bow at the end, and women are only supposed to smile and be yes men for the anchor.
Sachi is also happily married to our chief editor, Mel Farr. Barbara Nevins, happily married to Nick Taylor, now lives in New York City and works for WCBS.
I regret leaving Atlanta because I have wonderful friends, and I enjoyed covering the news there, and I enjoyed covering the state legislature. I enjoyed covering Georgia politics. But I don't regret moving on because I think that's what is necessary in order to build a good career.
Naturally, the biggest story was the birthday party on July the 4th. Walter Cronkite covered it for 14 straight hours, and the finish was just fine. Turned out to be the harbinger of a vital and productive local programming unit appeared in June.
I won't tell you how this is done, but I'll give you a clue. Only believe half of what you see.
And in September, Dave Michaels, who had been working in Los Angeles, came back to Atlanta to work for Channel 11.
That first night on the air doing 11 Alive News, I saw your newsroom clear as a bell, because I knew everybody in this newsroom was watching me over there. Yeah, it was strange.
So help me God.
Georgia had a legitimate claim on the lead story of the year.
Inside Atlanta,
Jim Axel, Michael Carlin, Don Smith, George Gentry, and I were members of the first investigative unit at an Atlanta television station. And the most important story we broke was the police cheating scandal, which would eventually lead to the resignation of Public Safety Commissioner A. Reginald Eads.
tough reporting, exposing the facts on News Scene. Special unit reports, only on 5, because you have the right to know.
In November, a dam collapsed in Toccoa. Roz Abrams, another Atlanta alumna, remembers the story.
I will never forget it. But I did some of my best work. I can remember the news director coming up after we did the 11 o'clock show, and he said, you know, I'm really proud of you. This is the best thing that I've ever seen you do. That was a heavy-duty story. And I've been in this business, going on almost 20 years now or something, and I have never done anything like that. I've covered tragedies before, but nothing got me like that story did.
Roz, who worked at the time at WXIA and later CNN, is now anchoring the #1 news program in New York City on WABC TV. Maynard Jackson began his second term. At mid-year, Pam Martin joined us as a weekend weather reporter. By the time she left us in the middle of last year, she had become our 6 and 11 o'clock anchor. In September, TV5 did something new and different. As it turned out, it was very successful.
The very first program, and I guess the thing that I am probably the proudest of having achieved over the 16 years that I was the general manager of Channel 5, was the premiering of the first magazine program in Atlanta television.
To do PM looked exciting for me, and it was for a full 7 years.
But you just never knew what was going to happen. It was Murphy's Law. Every time you went out, anything that could go wrong would go wrong, and you just learned to adjust, and it was truly a special time, I think, for all of us.
The year began George Busby's second term. In March, a story began that would not end for many months.
The missing and murdered children was probably the worst story to get covered out of Atlanta.
On June 30th, MARTA opened the East Line, and rapid transit became a real possibility in traffic-clotted Atlanta, at least if you happen to be headed for Avondale. 2 meteorologists joined us, Ken Cook, who is still here, and Glenn Schwartz, who is not. He's in New York, too, working for the Fox station there.
You know, I go around telling people, I used to work with her, and I used to work with Forrest Sawyer, do you know that? And I used to work with Corey McPherson, and I used to work with Barbara Nevins. Do you believe that? All from the same station at the same time.
They're going there.
They're going, no, they're going, Forrest, I don't care about. Tell me about Debbie.
Deborah Norville, even though she still lets her friends call her Debbie, is on NBC's early news show, Sunrise. She and her husband live in New York, too.
Did I ever think I'd have a job like this? No. I don't even think I ever dared dream about anchoring network news because I didn't want to set myself up for disappointment. Believe it or not, when I was a student at the University of Georgia, my goal, my ultimate dream was to end up in Atlanta, reporting the news in Atlanta. And things sort of took the fast track, and that's not exactly how it turned out. I learned a lot in Atlanta, and there were a lot of very talented and very good people there who taught me a lot. So I guess that's my fondest memory. It's not a specific thing, it's more a collection of the camaraderie.
As the 70s were winding down, two important things happened. Chinese Premier Deng Xiaoping visited Atlanta, and Leroy Powell visited Manuel's Tavern.
Beer. And was looking at his collection of beer cans, and I saw one that had generic beer on it. I mean, it was white can, said beer. And the more I studied it, the more un-American it looked, and I figured somebody needed to talk about this. So I went back to the TV station and suggested, and nobody else would do it, so I said, well, I will. And they said, well, go ahead. They didn't think I was going to do it, but I did. But folks, when the time comes in this country when beer drinkers will surrender their dreams of themselves to generic beer, I have grave fears for this republic. I thank you.
Let's get physical, physical. I wanna get physical.
Always like the sun comes up each day.
Always like the games that children play.
Some things never change. Some things are always.
Every day for over 25 years, Walmart has always had the low price on all your favorite brands. And you can trust we always will. Walmart, always the low price on the brands you trust, always.
Different people have different reasons for making Shell gasolines the best-selling in America. Some like the performance of SU 2000.
Put in the best.
Some like paying the same price, cash or credit.
Okay, team, let's go.
Some like the little extras you don't find everywhere.
Your front tire's a bit low.
The people may be different. The reasons may be different. But the choice is the same. Shell. Experience the difference.
Before you consider buying this car, or this car, consider this. The Volkswagen Fox GL, which comes in under all three. So if you found small Japanese four-door sedan prices to be hovering above reality, the only thing left to consider is a test drive in a Fox. But do it soon, because Foxes go fast.
Before you buy a car, test drive a Fox at your Atlanta area Volkswagen dealer.
When the fear of summer crabgrass has you yellow, when your grass fades to brown, when battling weeds has you red in the face, or your yard has the buggy blues, use Green Sweep. There's a Green Sweep solution for most every lawn problem. Just hook it up to a hose and spray. Green Sweep, it can really green up your lawn, and then some. Enter Green Sweep's Weekend Freedom Sweepstakes. Get details wherever you buy Green Sweep.
This 40-year-old Philco, how long since you heard that name, still works just fine. The airport they built in 1961 wasn't working so fine in the mid-70s, though, so they built a great big new one with the terminal set between the runways, and it opened after an introductory documentary. Only the Peachtree Road Race is larger than our annual Heart Trek, begun in 1980. We expect 6,000 runners this year. So far, the race has made nearly $500,000 for the Georgia Heart Association. Two men joined TV5. Forrest Sawyer came from radio. Before the year was out, he hosted 60 Minutes with Walter Cronkite, a special on the departing evening news anchorman. 5 years later, Sawyer would be anchoring for CBS himself. And after a hiatus, he's now at ABC. Jim Kay, he called himself then, went to NBC after 6 years. Now as Jim Kazurski, he's back, and we're glad to have him. Just as people go from one network to another, so may television stations, which is exactly what happened.
As you know, at that time, the people at Cox, the licensee of WSB-TV, for reasons best known to them, made the decision that they would end their long-term relationship with NBC and go to ABC. Consequently, it left NBC with Channel 11 or Channel 11 with NBC.
Its ears on straight, right where we belong. WAGA TV5, 31 years with CBS in Atlanta.
Moments after his inauguration, Ronald Reagan announced the freedom of the American hostages who'd been held in Iran. One of them, Colonel Charles Scott, was from Atlanta. Jim Axel, who had covered the return from Wiesbaden back home, co-anchored a special program with Colonel Scott.
Let's go back to where you're blindfolded, and where did they take you first?
Ken Watts came to the recently renamed Eyewitness News, and Bo Bach joined the sports staff.
I do solemnly
Andrew Young
swear.
succeeded Maynard Jackson as mayor of Atlanta and was promptly trapped with several 100,000 other Atlantans in Snow Jam 82. Corey McFerrin joined the sports department, where he stayed for just over 2 years until a news executive at the New York ABC station judged his Emmy entry and offered him a job.
That lady, by the way, is no longer working with us, a casualty of the wars, the television wars in New York, but we'll forever be grateful to her for having passed that tape along. And as hard as it is to believe now, the Braves were a power when I was there and went to won the division, the NL West, and it was very exciting. You know, the Dale Murphys and Phil Necros and Coach Joe Torre and the whole bit. It was very exciting. I remember getting champagne dumped on me in the locker room, a wild scene, and that probably is my single greatest sports memory from the Atlanta years.
In March, Weekend Magazine premiered. A little over a year later, Lisa Clark joined WAGA as its host. This was the year WAGA brought the Peabody Award, television journalism's highest honor, to Atlanta. The program that won it was Paradise Saved, a documentary about Cumberland Island. Virginia Gunn left Channel 5 to marry Arthur Bill Deal on New Year's Eve on St. Simon's Island, which left PM Magazine without a co-host. Then, after 4,000 people applied for the job, the field was narrowed, and John Patrick introduced his new partner.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet my new co-host, Joyce Morgan. Hi. Hi. How you doing?
I'm fine. Joyce is now a news anchor at WJKS, Channel 17 in Jacksonville. China came to Atlanta in the inaugural exhibition at the new High Museum of Art. The headlines for 1984 were not very good. Reverend Martin Luther King Sr., Daddy King, died, and there were a lot of problems at the zoo. Ronald Reagan's second inaugural was sent inside by the near-zero weather in Washington. A neighborhood group called the Roadbusters brought work on the Presidential Parkway to a standstill, and a group called Coniston Partners began an unfriendly takeover attempt on Storer Broadcasting, which owned WAGA. Gone with the Wind celebrated its 50th anniversary of publication. Cynthia Good and Amanda Bevel joined the newsroom, and Wyche Fowler joined the Senate. The Jan Kemp case raised serious questions about the conflicts between sports and scholarship at the University of Georgia. And in a leveraged buyout, the investment firm of Kohlberg Kravis Roberts bought Storer Broadcasting. 1987 began with a big story and ended with a bigger one. The Forsyth County March started the year in January. The uprising of Cuban prisoners at the Atlanta prison wound it up in November. And George Gillette bought controlling interest in Channel 5 and 5 other former Storer stations.
Well, when we bought Storer, the primary reason that we were interested in Storer was because of Atlanta and WAGA. And that was a highlight for us. We've been in television for many years, and we've been in radio for an even longer time. The privilege of owning one of the great stations and one of the greatest markets in the country was an opportunity we couldn't turn down.
The year began with a brand new newscast on Channel 5, another first for Atlanta television. Our new sports anchor, Robin Roberts, took you on a tummy-turning tour of America's best thrill rides. And Atlanta was the center of the world's attention for a week in July. As the year ended, 2 special programs focused attention on significant problems. Eat at Your Own Risk dealt with the potential hazards of chemicals used with food. And Eyewitness News revived a great American tradition, the town hall meeting. Drugs were the subject of our first. It will not be our last.
But it needs to be done. And even though I didn't get the last word that I wanted, it was a good show. And it, for the first time, let people understand that the drug problem wasn't a public housing problem alone. that it was a suburban problem, it was a business problem, it was an athlete's problem. Ultimately, it's a problem of meaning. And that came through.
So here we are, early in 1989. We have a new president. The legislature says a new stadium, the Georgia Dome, is okay with them. Sales tax is going up, but food will become exempt. And whatever Vince Dooley does, he won't be running for governor. Channel 5 is 40. In some ways, a lot of years, and laughs and tears and pleasure and pride, especially in the people who've worked here and the work they've done and keep doing.
Well, I don't know. I think I'll retire, but, you know, as long as you feel good, why, what's the use of retiring as long as you can wait?
Atlanta has some of the finest personnel in television of any place I've ever been. And this station right here, celebrating its 40th, doesn't have to take a back seat to anybody.
I'm impressed with the quality of the people and the quality of the reporting, and it's so far beyond what the early days were. It's impressive.
I drive by this building every now and then, and I'm almost embarrassed not to be a part of it because I felt so close to this place.
Yes, I miss everybody.
I did enjoy WAGA. It was without a doubt the kindest station I ever worked for was WAGA.
Georgians are great people. I mean, that is God's country, and I'll argue that with anybody. And I don't say that just because this is being seen in Georgia. It is a wonderful, special place, and people are real and true and honest. And if they don't like you, they'll tell you they don't like you. But if they do like you, they'll tell you that too. It's just, yeah, I miss it. I come home and get my batteries charged pretty often.
Chuck Scarborough, Chuck Moore, Jim Axel. I could go down the list. There's so many wonderful people I came in contact with. And I think I learned something from all of them about the business or about humanity or about myself.
I'm not suggesting that it was all fun and games and everybody was laughing all the time. We didn't make as much money as they make now, but we worked very hard, and I think we liked what we were doing.
We had our share of heartaches and our share of trials and tribulations, but we also had a good time, and we also managed to accomplish a lot.
There's no question that our business has changed over 40 years, just as every other business has. I don't think that's necessarily good or bad. It's just real life. I'm very encouraged about the future because we need to help Atlanta get bigger and better. I think we have 190 television professionals here ready and dedicated to do that, and that's what makes me so enthusiastic about the future.
We're impressed with the importance of this medium. We shall hope to learn to use it and not to abuse it.
What can you say about